For around $30, you can shoot anamorphic widescreen video with your Mavic Air 2 and even get some of those iconic lens flares as well. There are some pros and cons to this lens, so in this video we're going to see if the Ulanzi Anamorphic Lens for the Mavic Air 2 is worth picking up. Ulanzi sent me this lens to review, and after using it to film some footage and edit, I think it's worth the $30 to pick one up and learn a new way of shooting. Learning to shoot with anamorphic footage and edit in a different aspect ratio is just adding another technique to your arsenal of shots, and in my opinion, that alone is worth the money. This lens does distort your image and does some funky color casting things, but stick around to the end and we'll learn how to fix those colors for free. My favorite part about this lens is the widescreen video the anamorphic lens gives you. The point of an anamorphic lens is to give you a wider aspect ratio, but it is a little different when you're filming since the image looks distorted. More on this later. But once you adjust the aspect ratio in post, the image looks natural and gives you more room to work with on the sides of the frame. It made shooting landscapes easier so I could get more in the frame without needing to fly higher. The next thing I was looking forward to were the lens flares this lens provides. This video is going to be filled with obnoxious lens flares because I wanted to figure out how I could best get flares with this lens. As long as you're pointing this lens directly at a light source, there will be some kind of flare happening. This lens being so cheap, the lens flares are hit and miss, but I enjoyed framing up my shots on my subject and to adjust the camera relative to the light to try to get the most flares that I possibly could. I have some tips on how to get the best flares with this lens a little later in the video. Another pro with this lens is you can start and stop the drone and let the gimbal calibrate with the lens on. This is pretty cool because the moment lens for the Mavic 2 Pro comes to mind and you had to start the drone, let the gimbal calibrate, and then put the lens and counterweight on. There is no counterweight for this lens and it's more of a filter than a lens size. Another pro for the smaller form factor is that you're able to fly with sport mode enabled and there are no errors or gimbal recalibrations between flights. The case that comes along with the lens is pretty nice too. It's a little bulkier than other plastic cases from DJI or Freewell, but it's a durable zippered case and it has a nice spot for a lens wipe too. Another pro that comes to mind again is the price. This lens retails for about 30 USD and in the scheme of drone accessories, this is pretty cheap for such a unique lens. And since the lens is so unique, you're not going to want to use this for every flight. This lens also has some downsides as well, and the first major downside is image quality. Anytime you're putting another lens or filter in front of your lens, there's a good chance there's going to be some kind of distortion, quality loss, or color shifting. This lens has all those problems, but understanding them will help mitigate the effects and help you shoot a more usable image. The most obvious distortion and quality loss is in the left and right hand sides of the frame, while the center has the least amount of distortion and quality loss. Keeping your subject in the center of the frame is really the best option to get the clearest image of your subject. Another thing to be aware of are the lens flares. If you're pointing your camera directly into the center of your light source, you'll actually get some pretty clean flares that are manageable. However, if you start putting your camera to about 45 degrees or more from your light source, there's going to be some crazy blue flares and smearing that you may or may not want in your footage, and you'll sometimes be able to get more traditional lens flares by moving the camera side to side over the light source as well. When Ulanzi reached out to me about this lens, I also asked them if they could send one of their mini RGB panels along as well, to see if different colors would result in different flares. But the flares were largely unaffected by the different colors of light. You might get slightly different colored flares, but for the most part, they will be that large blue flare. You'll get the most crisp flares when your light is pointing directly at the camera and the surrounding area is dark, so there's more contrast to see the flare. Slightly overexposing will get you the most flare, but overexposing too much will lose the flare in the overexposed areas. If the flares are too strong, slightly underexposing your footage will reduce those flares. Another thing to be aware of is that there is a color shift with this lens. I was shooting with D-Cinelike with this lens and the green skews more towards yellow, while the yellow and magenta skew towards red. Blue and cyan seem to be a little muddier and desaturated as they don't have much punch like the normal and D-Cinelike footage has. To correct this, I took my color checker passport along with me and got a quick shot while I was landing the drone, and packing up for the day. When I got home, I brought the shot into DaVinci Resolve and corrected the colors better to represent their true colors, and exported these corrections as a LUT. You can download this LUT for free in my Mavic Air 2 course. There will be a link in the description below. Another thing to be aware of is that if you're using this filter, you won't be able to use ND filters and you'll have to crank your shutter speed up if you're in a bright environment. That being said, this isn't a lens you're going to use every day, and it's a stylistic choice to use this lens. Adjusting the aspect ratio does add a step to your post-production, but it's not difficult or time-consuming to do right inside of Premiere Pro in the Interpret Footage window. I won't be using this lens on any commercial shoots, but for $30, it's a good lens to experiment around with and learn a few things and make some unique videos. Again, if you'd like to download my Ulanzi Anamorphic Mavic Air 2 color correction LUT for free, enroll in my Mavic Air 2 course below. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with a friend. If you didn't enjoy this video, share it with someone you don't like. Thanks for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.